Hi, and welcome to Facing Change, a series of discussions from LexisNexis Risk Solutions focusing on how we all, businesses, industry and others, are coping in the face of this unprecedented crisis we find ourselves in. So today I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest, Richard Fenning. Richard, you are a partner of Manchester Square Partners, providing advice to leaders. Until last year, you were CEO of Control Risks for 15 years, during which time you guided them to become one of the world's leading risk advisory groups. You have first-hand experience of advising global clients through previous crises from 9/11, SARS, natural disasters, including tsunamis, and the global financial crisis, amongst others. So, Richard, in light of your vast experience of handling previous crises, I'd imagine leaders are coming to you asking, hey, Richard, you've seen many disasters before. What reference points have we got to guide us through this one?
Well, thank you, Angus. I mean, experience matters, for sure. And people who've been through some of the situations that you just mentioned, whether it's a global financial crisis, taking their organization through 9/11, dealing with all sorts of kind of previous medical, clinical pandemic problems, all of that is a help. For sure. But what we have to be clear about is there's no blueprint for this. This hasn't happened before on this scale. So yes, we can find some lessons from the past. We can find some comfort and some inspiration from the past that these things are manageable and that we can get through them. But we can't find a blueprint, as I say. We can't find a guidebook that's going to tell us what to do. This is really quite different to anything that we've experienced before.
The other thing that's often pointed out right now is, quite rightly in some ways and perhaps not in others, is that people make the comment that we are all in the same boat, and clearly we are in many respects, but clearly some people are right at the sharp edge and others are less utilized right now, and different businesses have different approaches. So when you hear that sort of phrase, we're all in the same boat, how do you react to that?
Well, in one way we are. It's these things are a great leveler in some ways. And I think most people are struck in these situations by that sort of sense of camaraderie, of kind of communal push and communal spirit that comes together, whether it is in your physical community or whether it's in your virtual community through work. I think there is something of that. And obviously that's what governments want to engender at this time, this sense of we're a nation together, or we're a series of nations together, pulling together for the common good. But in reality, different companies experience this in different ways. For some, this is going to be the end, I'm afraid. Those organizations heavily indebted who are in particular sectors where their businesses absolutely just stopped, they will never be the same organization again. Something will change fundamentally for them if they survive at all. I have to say they are in the minority. For most people, this is going to be really tough, but almost certainly get through it. And then for a lucky few, they can't cope with the demand because suddenly they're needed more than ever. And you're thinking of food suppliers or whatever in that kind of situation. So its impact is uneven. Whilst we are all in it together, we're not experiencing it in the same way. Similarly, as individuals, we have different experiences of it. So if you're in the fortunate position where you don't have aged relatives, you don't have small children who you're now trying to homeschool at the same time as run your business, you're in a very different situation to somebody who does have dependent relatives, an aged parent perhaps, who is having to do all of this virtually from home, who has got small children, maybe all sorts of other pressures on them. That's a very, very different experience. So as these days go by, as potentially these weeks go by, we have to expect that we will see some behavioral changes from people from what we normally expect. And there's got to be a lot of give and take. There's got to be a lot of tolerance. This is not being experienced the same way by everybody.
Okay. Another thing that brings to mind is that people always want to in some way take control of the future, forecast forward. It's a natural instinct really to orientate ourselves to what's coming. But at a time like this, there's a lot of talk about whether this is going to be a U-shaped recession, a V-shaped one, or an L-shaped, whatever that is. given that we're in these early weeks, we probably can't define those sorts of things. Is it all about tactics rather than strategy?
Yes, it is mostly, and that's right. It should be. It's about getting people focused on the here and now, taking those tough decisions, getting the organization to adjust, adapting systems and platforms and working patterns to enable the business to continue. But what I think is important is that we don't extinguish the ability to kind of project forward and start to plan. Some of that is going to be futile because we don't know how this is going to shape up. We don't know when it's going to end, and we don't know how deep the impact is going to be kind of economically and socially. But it's a human, as you say, it's a human instinct to want to do that. And so we should allow that, we should allow a valve through which that innate ability to want to project forward and think about the future. I think our advice is not to do that excessively because we just don't know. But to do none of it, I think, puts too much pressure on people who do inevitably want to kind of speculate somewhat and conjecture about the future. That's okay. Just don't do too much of it.
I mean, perhaps one of the benefits that will ultimately come out of an experience like this is to exactly your point, which is that we will be better prepared, perhaps, for an even more savage pandemic in future years.
Yeah, I mean, it may not be a pandemic. It may be widespread antibiotic resistance. It may be a massive cyber failure that really has a kind of multiple effect across different countries. These things are very hard to predict. They tend to have a kind of different rhyme and reason than we ever really expect. But the fact that they can happen and could happen is generally predictable. What we can't predict is exactly the how and when.
Yeah.
We shouldn't be surprised that these things happen.
Longer term, are the things that companies should be thinking about that may change the risk profile that they would be used to? Or is it really ultimately that this sort of experience actually toughens companies up, and when we come out of it, we'll be stronger than we went in?
Yeah, it does toughens companies up. It toughens leadership teams up, for sure. I mean, there is a very specific problem, of course, when companies disperse like they have, and everybody's working from home, and people are using technology on a completely new scale. It increases people's cyber vulnerability for sure. And I'm sorry to say there are some people out there who will take very deliberate, malicious advantage of the fact that our IT systems are more vulnerable in this situation than they are normally. I think, to be optimistic, I think what these crises do, though, is they demonstrate the extraordinary power that teams of people can exercise when they have a very clear, singular purpose, when they're working together. It demonstrates that egos and agendas and politics can be put aside. It demonstrates that the capacity for human ingenuity to come up with new and innovative ways to tackle this. I don't just mean advances in clinical medicine to tackle the coronavirus, although that will turn out to be extraordinary, I'm sure. But there is so much good that we can witness in our organizations, in the health service, in the way that people are both behaving and what they're applying themselves to. But on balance, I think there is something that is redeeming about the capacity of human beings to fend for themselves when they find themselves up against it. I think it's truly inspiring.